Oh wow!
This was brilliant, brilliant.
This was brilliant,
Again,
for sure.
quite trippy. The feeling makes you feel naturally high listening to music of
It's musically high.
this caliber. This was brilliant. I think this contribution of this musician, Peter Bardens, one of the members of CAMEL, is absolutely top notch, amazing, high caliber contributions. He plays the organ, the piano, the celesta, the synthesizer, the mellotron, also does vocals for the band. Quite phenomenal his contribution. And it can be sensed more so in songs like this, the one that we just heard. Because it has so much of that trippy feeling because of this organ, coming in. Whether it's the organ, the synthesizer, I'm not really sure, but it sounds more like the organ that's playing. It's absolutely trippy, that feeling, it's like you just can listen to it for hours. Kind of reminds me of a couple of songs of the Doors, perhaps at the same time, maybe, maybe a bit before the Doors or after the Doors, who knows. But kind of reminds me of the Doors. It has that trippy feeling with the organ player of the Doors doing a phenomenal job once again. Which was that song? But so many songs of Doors, but a couple of them definitely it reminded me of. Beautiful music, beautiful music. The 70s, yes. The early part of the 70s especially, when all this experimental music came into being. People who did their own thing, they didn't really care what perhaps the audience thought about them or what people thought about them in general. They just made music as they felt like, whether they were high or whether they were not high. They just created music. There's a phenomenal amount of music created in this early part of the 70s.
And that was the best.
And till today, I think very, very few decades can be compared to the 70s. Because musically, the 70s and then once again, 20 years later, the 90s, because of the emergence of MTV and other music television channels around the world, I think because of that, the 90s too became one of the phenomenal decades for music, especially rock and metal music. Saw huge spike in sales, concert tickets being sold, as well as worldwide fan bases for all these bands. And of course, those who were there in the 70s and still around in the 90s creating music also or performing live, they definitely reaped the rewards in the 90s when once again people started listening to all that music. And then after that, I think it's gone, it's dead. More or less the 70s and 90s were it. I don't think the 80s of course were good, but not as good as the 70s and 90s for rock and metal music specifically. And then of course you have lots of genres coming in and some bands here and there which made a name for themselves. But you never had that kind of inflow or flood, a tsunami of music of this caliber. So CAMEL is one of those bands like Pink Floyd, The Doors, Led Zeppelin, and perhaps 50 other artists we've already heard who came around this time with their major albums. And till today people listen to them, and I'm sure they might listen to them even 30, 40 years from now. Yes, they may be a tinier audience than the popular music, so to speak, but they will still be an audience. Trust me, because this is real music.
While listening to it, they definitely reminded me of certain bands, and Doors was not one of them. Savio brought it out, and rightly so. There was a hint of it. But they definitely reminded me of Rush, and I was forced to think, and this is on a serious note, what happens to certain bands? Because this stuff, 1974 Mirage of CAMEL, definitely sounds absolutely different from what we have been reacting to from them. That is unlike what is being heard over here or what we are listening to over here. All of that, I kept thinking all along from Camel that they just make that sound of Arabian kind of sound when they make music. But this has changed everything for me. I'm not looking, I mean, I'm not even thinking about the sound that I have listened to or reacted to so far from them. And this is completely different. This is progressive. Last two songs that we reacted to are absolutely progressive and mind blowing. And the way they are playing, I mean, they sound great. They sound great together. That is. Every member is, when you listen to artists, you know every member is confident when they are playing what they are playing and what they are doing. For me, this song especially was more about the drummer. I don't know, nobody wants to put the drummer in the spotlight, but for me, it was the drummer all along. He started it. He had a vibe. He had the rhythm. He had everything going. Andy Ward. For me, yes, Andy Ward was all over the place. It was his print all over the place for this one. He commanded it. Although you want to listen to the synthesizer or you want to listen to the guitarist, but for me, I was purely listening to Andy Ward playing the drums because he was good at it. I don't know. There are a lot of things that cannot work for bands. The whole chemistry, their personalities, their habits, and the kind of things that come along with popularity, even if after one album or after a song or something. So a lot of things can go wrong. Maybe one of those things could have been with Camel as well, because I didn't hear this side of Camel ever before. And for me, this is astonishing. This is great stuff that I'm listening to from a band that I didn't expect. So this is definitely unexpected. The very first song that we reacted to, Free Fall, and I said, wow, I wasn't expecting that sound from them. I wasn't expecting the vocals that came from this album. I wasn't expecting the way their whole sound is different. They sound differently in this one. I never heard this side before, and I like this one. I definitely like this side more than the Arab side that they play, because that has its own charm, but maybe for one song or maybe an album, that's enough. You cannot build yourself completely on a certain sound. This is good, this is different, and then there can be diversity, but it should not be always what I have been listening to. This is phenomenal work, and I loved it from the beginning to the end. This is what I would appreciate from any band.